Coffee Pot Conversations.
Bonjour et bienvenue to Coffee Pot Conversations, a podcast about Paris. Well, yeah. So, anyway, this is one of those special interview episodes whereby I'm sitting in my garden just talking to you guys about what the interview was about. So, it was about a chap called Charles Pappas. I go into a little bit more detail within the conversation, but he did write this book here, which is It's a Bitter Little World. And he also wrote this book here, which is called Flying Cars, Zombie Dogs and Robot Overlords. And I have an image of it here on my Kindle app on my phone, which you can't see, so that's absolutely pointless. There we go. It's in there. Flying Cars, Zombie Dogs and Robot Overlords. I do struggle with that title during the interview. But more importantly, or equally as important, but more importantly for the episode, is this book here, which is Nobody Sits Like the French. And we don't really discuss the book that much, which is a shame, because it's all three books are amazing. He's also written other stuff. But what I like about this book, and this one here, it is exceptionally well written. I'd go into all of that stuff, but really what I like, and I don't know the best way to show, is this. Look at that. How cool is that? I mean, yeah, that is cleverly done. That is beautifully done. So it's a chap who'd written a book, Nobody Sits Like the French, Charles Pappas, and he reached out to me and he said, would I be interested? And I said, yes, absolutely. The publishing company sent me a copy of the book, so I am exceptionally grateful for that. There's a little postcard that they sent on behalf of Charles Pappas. Anyway, so it's not one of these, I've got to say good things, because that's not what my podcast's about. If I didn't like the book, I would have just gone, sorry, Mr. Pappas, but no. Thoroughly loved the book. I enjoyed what it was about. I did some digging and that was it. But enough of the waffle. Yeah, no, it makes a change. So we'll go into the interview there. I will tell you now, at the end of it, I lost connection. I was in my regular coffee shop and something went wrong. It went all whoopsie woo-woos, and right at the end you will see that there is a break. Charles starts talking to himself, but covering a part of the book, and then it just shuts out. Will there be a part two? I'm hoping so. I will at some point, once I'm not too busy doing other things within the podcast. I will reach out to Charles and say, can we give it another go, and we'll talk about the book or anything else that he finds interesting, because his other books are exceptionally vastly interesting. I'm going to give you a quote afterwards because I referred to it within and I couldn't remember what it was. So if I do it afterwards, it's a little bit of, what was it about? What was the quote? And the other book, the Flying Cars, Zombie Dogs and Robot Overlords, it's more about the general ethos of universal expositions, world fairs, if you like, which is sort of what Nobody Sits Like the French is about. It says exploring Paris through its world expos, which can be seen just there. Shall I give you a bit of a blurb on the back? It just is a radically new way of seeing Paris. Now, I don't know if I'm allowed to do what I'm going to do because I haven't explicitly asked for permission because of the whole copyright laws, but we'll leave it there. So anyway.
Coffee Pot Conversations.
Hello, and who are you?
I am Charles Pappas, and good afternoon to you. I'm a writer, senior writer at Exhibitor Magazine, and author, as you probably know, of Nobody Sits Like the French. Yay, there's my book.
Absolutely. But not just that. I was going to hold this out, but there's another one here as well.
It's actually my first book. It's A Bitter Little World, and I had a real love of film noir and the language in it, because the language is like, a bonfire compared to a spark in other movies. And so I began collecting the great quotes, and eventually it just came together in what I hope is kind of a fun book.
I've not read it for me, and we will talk about Nobody Sits Like the French, I promise. But I picked this up and I thought, I'm going to surprise you with a quote. And I turned to one and I thought, I can't do it. And So I'm not going to. But it just happened to be the first one I picked up today, and I've lost it now, thankfully. But it's to do with a, a battery-operated vagina. So
Well,
I thought I'd leave that
I
one.
didn't say it was safe for children to read.
Yeah.
Nowhere does it say that. There's no disclaimer.
So going from that, I promise we are going to talk about Nobody Sits Like the French. Going from this book onto, I believe it was your next one, The Giant Leap.
Well, it was actually the next one was the first one on exhibitions.
Oh.
It was flying cars, zombie dogs, and robot overlords. And then I did a quick one, a giant leap on the space race. And then after that, then I went back, I reverted to my normal self, which is obsessed with exhibitions and world expos. And then that's when I finished finally the Nobody Sits Like the French book.
So before we go on to Nobody Sits Like the French, I have done a little bit of I'm not going to say background research, but I thought, well, I'm going to find out more about you. And I listened to the episode on Oliver G, the Eiffel Tower, which that was the first podcast of yours I listened to. And then I listened to one, and there was a lady talking about the space episodes, and I thought, wait a minute, there's more to you than meets the eye. And then I found out about the other book, and then about the film noir, and I thought, you are, as I said earlier, a smart cookie. It's how do you?
I go off on the things that interest me. Do you know what I mean? It's an excuse. It's an excuse to pursue an interest.
That's fabulous. That really, and I say that because I did a master's in creative writing, and I always say go off on tangents, take a little diversity, sort of go on tangents. And when I write my blog posts, my topics for podcasts, all over the place, and I thought it was just me. So I'm glad to see there's two lunatics in the universe.
Exactly. It gives you a societally approved reason for going down a rabbit hole, doesn't it?
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Yeah, it's not the caffeine. It's not the 3 o'clock being awake in the morning. It's being creative. That's nice.
Exactly.
So I'm going to hold the book up without the camera moving. Nobody Sits Like the French. I'm hoping that's the right way round for everyone. Now I'm going to tell you about it first. I read it. It was a fantastic book. It's the first piece of non-fiction that I've actually enjoyed reading for a long, long time. I do read a lot of books about Paris, and they talk about the nice bits of Paris and top 10 lists and things like that. But this book covers so much more. But more importantly, it really held me. I think it took me a week to read it, which is nothing to do with the way it's written. But there's so much information in it. I had to stop, and it's just it's. I can't praise it enough, and I should write a review. It's so absorbable, and there's so much information being thrown at you, but done in such a personable way. It's like you're talking to us, not you're writing a book. And listen to other episodes that you've done across your range of interests. It seems like you're that person who actually talks to people. So for me, reading a book and now talking to you, I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to let you speak. Anything you want to say to start off with a book, you feel free.
I was going to say that's actually it's a very nice way of encapsulating the book. For me, I tried to write it in a very accessible style because this is how I would talk about it. If I were walking with you by Petit Palais, by the Grand Palais, if I were walking with you, this is how I would talk about it. And this is how I would enthuse about it. And I hope my enthusiasm comes through because I genuinely love it. I don't tire of it. And Paris, it's interesting to me. They did something with world expos in the 19th century that the world expos today are reinventing and rediscovering. That being, we don't build and burn the structures. That was the thing to do in those days. You built these magnificent cities, but they were transient. And the idea was that you would destroy them and they would be lost. because there would be then the fear of missing out during the event. It's only going to be here for 3 months or 6 months or whatever. And you would miss out on it if you didn't go because it will disappear afterwards. And yet, Paris reversed. They did a 180 degrees on that and kept so many of the structures that became inseparable from your idea and experience of Paris. And only now, in Shanghai, in Dubai, and eventually in Riyadh in the year 2030, are they rediscovering that. The Parisians were doing that more than a century ago. They got it, if you will, to use the vernacular.
Definitely. There was, everyone knows about the Eiffel Tower. It went up, it stayed. But there are a few other bits that outside of the book I learned. There's a modern art gallery opposite the Eiffel Tower. There was the Palais de Tokyo. It was built for one of the exhibitions. And there's a bandstand in Parc Montsouris, which I've mentioned is coming up in the next season. And that was built and then moved. And now it's part of the history side of it. I don't remember which one it was built for, but you're all right. They build things and it stays. And I think it's.
Go ahead.
Thanks. You sort of get that just throughout. Generally, you get it throughout Paris. Things are built to last and built to stay for a purpose.
They were. But there's also another kind of reality behind the reality. And let's call it inspiration of what happened. There's so much of the French experience, of the Parisian experience, that is still kind of invisible because it was more cultural. I mean, let me give you an example. 1867 at the Expo in Paris. There's a man wandering around. You wouldn't have noticed him. He didn't stand out necessarily, but he wanders into what was really one of the first large-scale aquariums. Now, aquariums for some scientists were no bigger than just something you could fit on your regular desk. It was very primitive, very backward at the time. But for the Expo, they created two massive underground ones that held something like 800 species of fish. So pretty amazing. And you went down. And in fact, they were so prolific in their effect that it was considered to be a world from the fish's point of view, which I kind of love when I read that phrase. But so this man wanders around it. He's looking at these, and especially he's seeing giant cuttlefish, like squid and that. And he's seeing an example, a prototype of the world's first diving suit. He also sees a scale model of a submarine, the plongeur, I believe it was called. And he goes home and he writes 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. All that because he wandered through an expo. All that. We wouldn't have it otherwise. And that particular aquarium was dismantled, rebuilt for the 1878 Expo again. And then eventually that became the modern aquarium and at the same site in Paris today. So even then, now, also almost 150 years later, all that still has that ripple effect. And yet again, think of what we would have missed if he had not walked through, Jules Verne walked through that expo that day, that time, and experienced it. That's the marvelous thing about expos that, Debussy one point walked through one of the expos and he heard the gamelan music from Java, and that completely reconstituted his idea of music. He created that almost the sound that's inseparable from him at this point now. Gauguin, Manet. Gauguin at the 1889 Expo showed off his works in the Café Volpini, and that began his career, where he began being mentioned in the same word and the same phrasing as Sagan. That set him off. 1889, the same Expo. There's a horticulturalist named Joseph Latour Marlier, and he's showing off his water lilies, which I think is kind of cool. But they were hybrids because the typical European ones were white. he had grafted them with one from North America. So this other, again, kind of nondescript guy is walking through and he gloms onto them. It was Monet. And these become his life's work. Now, he was already kind of setting off the Impressionist movement, but I think what really made him immortal was walking through this and by pure serendipity happening on these water lilies. And then voila, his career really takes off into something he will forever be associated with, something that will actually make him, if you will, immortal. And I rather like that because it's power of an expo to make ideas, to hit the tipping point of an idea and to inspire people, not through any planned itinerary, but to pure serendipity.
You say serendipity. Do you think those people would have crossed each other's paths and sort of recognised one
Yes.
another? See, that's
Some would have, others would not have. And that's kind of the fun of it when you think about Gauguin, who is lesser known at that time, passing by Monet, or something like that. Monet had done Impression Sunrise, which gave in the vernacular the term Impressionism to the movement. And so, yes, he was big, he was high profile, he was high status, but others weren't. And yet, would they have crossed their paths? Of course they would have, but they wouldn't have known it. And, that also makes me think there is some film, there is some video from the 1900 Expo in Paris, the one that actually introduced Art Nouveau to the world, of Oscar Wilde, or possibly Oscar Wilde walking through it. No one is exactly sure if this is actually him. It looks like him. The profile looks like him. And from descriptions of his walk, I think it is him, but nobody knows for sure. So I've looked at this film clip many times and I wonder, is it him? Is it Wilde? And there's a certain jauntiness which makes me think it is him. There's just a certain aspect of it. And I keep thinking, by God, the questions I would want to ask him about what he saw and what made an impression, what he loved, what he loathed. All of those things. I can't answer it. No one really knows for sure, but I like to think it was him.
I'm running over a list of questions that I don't have. With the Paris Expos, there's been 5 of them. Is that correct?
There were actually 7.
Oh, okay. Oh, see, it's because I left my notes
Seven,
behind.
7 expos total, which is, and they had considered bidding for the 2025 Expo, which ended up being in Osaka, but coupled with the Olympics, it was a bridge too far, if you will. It was just too much money would be spent, and so they really focused on the Olympics instead. I kind of missed that because I like to wonder what would another Parisian Expo now have been like. What would they have done to set themselves apart? I think it would have been a great focus on things like luxury goods. But I wonder, would they have been willing to do the radical architecture that was the Eiffel Tower? Because remember, it was reviled in its day. It was reviled when it was going up. There were even plans to dismantle it within 20 years. And one of the interesting aspects is Eiffel had played with the idea of dismantling it, sending it to St. Louis for the 1904 World Expo there, and then dismantling it and then bringing it back to Paris. But he was suspicious that the French bureaucracy would still dislike it enough to somehow find an excuse why we can't rebuild it again.
Lost in
So
transit.
today, yeah, yes, whoops, lost in transit. But it tells you a little bit about how radical it was in that moment in time. And I kind of like that because I go to expos today and there's some radical architecture, but would they have done anything that crossed the line from radical to scandalous? I don't know. But the French did it. The French did scandal. And so when I look at the Eiffel Tower today when I'm back in Paris, I don't see this beloved monument. I see something that set people's heads on fire because some of them hated it so much. And I love how at that time, the intellectuals who loathed it had written a kind of Jeremiah against it. And one of their reasons was it was so barbaric. Even the Americans would understand how ugly it was. I thought, well, thank you very much for that. But it gives you an idea of what the conventional wisdom was. It gives you an idea of what the chattering class, the intelligentsia, thought of it back then. Only a few people really took it to heart and really accepted it. And of course, over time, it became an institution. Over time, it became beloved. And right now, it actually ranks as the most valuable monument in the world. It's worth something like $600 billion to France. Now, think about that figure, 600 billion with a B. That's what it's worth to Paris and to France.
That's that's quite a lot. I mean, I know the British monarchy brings money in, but I don't think it's anywhere near that sort of money. It's that's, that is I'm just, yeah, that's about
It boggles the
it's
mind,
about
doesn't it? Doesn't it really kind of boggle your mind?
it's 4 years of my Christmas bonus. That's a lot of money.
Yes, yes, of course. Well, 5 or 6 for me, but right. I know it, but again, it's like then you look at Petit Palais and Grand Palais, and there's such gorgeous works, or the Pont Alexander Bridge, and they're so inescapably French. But at that time, they were still avant-garde. Then they were still art. They were Art Nouveau, and not everyone was a fan, but they built it because they believe in it. They built it because they still wanted to impress the world, and that's something that I think is missing from most understandings of World Expos. They were nation branding. They were meant to be a convivial way, not with armies, but with architecture to show how much better we are than the world. So London, Paris, New York, Chicago, and nowadays, Dubai, and in 2030 again, it'll be Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. They're going to try to wow the world. And the West has become somewhat cynical about World Expos, as if we can see everything online. It's not that important. It's dull, something my grandmother went to. Funny, but the rest of the world, the non-Western world, sees them as a way to elevate your country, to stand in front of the line, not in the middle of the line, not in the back of the line, but to stand in the front of the line. So Shanghai did it in 2010. Dubai did a magnificent job for Expo 2020. Osaka did a pretty good job in 2025. And I think Riyadh will try to have the best one ever, the most daunting, daring, prolific one ever.
Will it ever come back to Paris, or at least
Yes.
part of the Western world?
Someday, someday. But I don't, I'm going to take a wild guess and say probably not for another 20 years. I'm good. I'm thinking that the arc of expos tends to move towards non-Western locales now. So again, Shanghai, no, Milan in 2015 was a somewhat exception to that rule, but Dubai, 2023 was canceled because of COVID. 2025 Osaka. Expo 2027 will be in Serbia. Kind of an unusual choice, but on the other hand, and I won't call it non-Western per se, but I would say it's a little bit of an exception to the rules we typically, think of for this. And then Riyadh, 2017, I skipped that one. 2017 was Kazakhstan. So again, you're taking these areas that we're not used to, that are somewhat uncommon, but they understand very deeply, very well, the soft power of an expo. And that's kind of one of the narratives, if you will, of all expos. What are they trying to show the world? What do they want to show you? What do you want to experience there? What do they want you to experience? So when you go, one of the games is not everyone can make it into every pavilion because there'll be 150 to say 250 structures you could potentially get into at a given expo. Well, sometimes, especially if the lines are long, you're not going to be able to do more than a handful of these. So they try to make an impression just through the experiential architecture, the exterior. It needs to be non-textural. That is, no text is needed to make an impression. And it needs to be something that you could walk by and get an impression without ever going into. So you'll see many, many examples of that. But imagine now you walk through Paris. You walk over the Pont Alexander Bridge, which is so beautiful. You visit the Eiffel Tower. You visit the Grand Palais. You visit Petit Palais. What would be, if you never went in, what would be your fleeting impression of the culture that country? I think it would be significant. I think it would be very impressed by that. Expos do that really well, but Paris did it better than anybody. 100 years ahead of their time in thinking that way, in thinking in that concept. They did it much better and way ahead of their time.
Do you think that's an inherently French or a Parisian thing, or is it just because I suppose at the time of doing it, they were sort of coming out of wars and everything was changed republics and things, and they were just prepared to go for it.
I'll tell you the truth. I've debated that, but I think a lot of it is inherent to French culture because there is that pride in French culture, the language, the food, and I think that extended to Expos. So they had pride of place. They wanted it to make an impression on the world. And think about this for a moment. In the 1900 Expo, the population of France was 40 million. 50 million visited the expo that year. Imagine the power to change world opinion about your country, or for just a given exhibitor to, change the world's opinion about what they're showing because they had technology, early versions of cars. But let me give you another example from the 1900s. The entrance was built by an artist named Rene Benet. And it was kind of in the Art Nouveau style. It was about 145 feet tall. It was called Port Monumental, and it was basically biomimetic architecture, what today we call biomorphic or biomimetic architecture, imitating nature. What he based it on was the radiolarium, which had been popularized by a German scientist named Ernst Haeckel. It was a microscopic creature that he had then blown up into this life-size version, monster-sized version, that would become the entrance. Now, Haeckel, by the way, he coined the term ecology, which I think is kind of a cool little factoid here. But at that time, it was also scandalous. It was also debated as to its merit. It was considered avant-garde and way ahead of its time. But I love the fact that it was the entrance. So while you're going through with your ticket, you're going through the turnstile and it's kind of tedious, you can glance up at something that's kind of transcendent. This is the world of Expo, where you're willing to push the boundaries of what the entrance is, even. Something as banal as that, right? And fun fact for your listeners, the turnstile was invented for the 1855 French Expo. And Daumier has these wonderful caricatures of women with their voluminous, skirts being caught up in it, being stuck in it. And I kind of love the fact that they morphed from that, something, an entrance technology that's good for Taylor Swift concerts, which we still have today. But the French did it right. They did the entrance knowing it's like going down the rabbit hole with Alice. The entrance is all important because it sets the tone and it resets you mentally for what you're going to see. So there's before, there's after. And to be honest, I never saw an entrance as good as the Port Monumental till Dubai in Expo 2020. when Asif Khan, the architect, built golden cube gates. They were monstrously tall, and they were lit gold at night, and they became magical. It took Expo more than a century to hit something as good as what the French did in 1900. And in fact, in 1889, the Eiffel Tower was where the entrance was. That's a dramatic entrance. That's a great entrance, right? And I love the fact that you could have gone up, you could have bought your ticket, and possibly you would have bought it from a woman named Jane Averill, who was discovered there, later became the dancer at the Moulin Rouge and one of Toulouse-Lautrec's most famous subjects. In fact, his most beloved subject, I think it's fair to say. All because she's sitting taking tickets at the 1889 World Expo right by the Eiffel Tower. Serendipity plays a major role in all these expos. And I love that. I just love the fact that, again, the French were so good at it, just putting the design out there enough so that all these random elements can play against each other. And you never know what the outcome is going to be.
But while you were discussing about the entrance, and then you mentioned about the German inventor, with the apologies, the robot dogs, flying zombies, and acrobatic helicopters. I will find out the actual title. You mentioned that you had the Germans and the Russians with their. They've now gone. I'm suspecting the big architectural buildings either side of the Eiffel Tower. Was that 1930s? I think that was
1937, with the Soviets and the Nazis facing off against each other. And that was deliberate. The French set there. It's one of the most dramatic photos you can ever see, because on one side you have the Soviet pavilion and then the Nazi pavilion confronting it on the other, with the Eiffel Tower playing referee in between. And of course, again, these are nation branding exercises. Soviets and the Nazis wanted to brand themselves. So they had giant, kind of horrific, because they're just huge. They're meant to intimidate you, not to wow you, not to charm you. They're meant to intimidate you. And frankly, they did a good job of it. But again, fortunately, they're in, the dustbin of history. But at that time, Albert Speer, by the way, was, Hitler's favorite architect, was the architect for the German pavilion in 1937. And he somehow stole the plans for the Soviet one. So he knew what he was up against, and he tried to make something which, again, would be a little bit more forbidding. And it had kind of I would call his more of an Art Deco look, where I would say the Soviet one was the kind of the brutalist architecture. Frankly, I think it was just ugly. But again, they were both meant to intimidate, and they both did a really good job. Those are things you'd like to forget about, but it's part of the Expo experience. It's part of what made the Paris Expo so unforgettable. The world comes there to compete, hopefully for better technology, better ideas, better solutions to the problems facing us. But sometimes it's just to create a tableau that's meant to shrink you, the visitor, rather than elevate you.
going, and I've pulled up my phone. I've got a Kindle app on my phone, just to there it is. It's that one there. So it's flying cars. I've lost it now. I'll let you tell me. What's that? Flying cars?
Flying cars, zombie dogs, and robot overlords. And this was a history partly of exhibitions themselves, including, of course, a lot of the world expos. But because I work for Exhibitor Magazine, and frankly, this is my jurisdiction, if you will. I analyze exhibits, what works, what doesn't. So I like being a historian of them, but I'm also doing the most modern interpretations of them and seeing what works. How are we working technology into them nowadays? How are we working new design? Biomimetic design is a big thing now. But again, this was done way early on in World Expos. In fact, the very first expo, which was in London in 1851, the French were the second with 1855, or rather the third, because New York was the second. The first one had the Crystal Palace in London as their main structure, which was all based on a giant Amazonian water lily named, of course, for Queen Victoria. But that was perhaps the first industrial version of biomorphic architecture, and Expo has followed that ever since. So again, Expo is almost 2 centuries ahead of the zeitgeist. It's 2 centuries ahead of what everyone else is doing nowadays. That's old hat to Expo, which again is one of the fun aspects of it. Think of the ambition, the vision, the audacity of people thinking they can do it, and they do.
So we will come back to the book again. Nobody sits like the French. But with expos and reading through things, you've got world expos, but then you have lesser expos that have got the really long names. Are they are they sort of as highly regarded, be it internationally or just nationally? Because in the UK we have, so just saying, in the UK we have the Ideal Home exhibition, and that runs every year. And now they've done the Christmas Ideal Home exhibition. But then you've got the trade exhibitions, one's for coffee, one's for computers. I saw one for aircraft. Is it? But they've all got really boring names.
Well, there were always trade fairs going back to the medieval times. And of course, so in some ways we evolved from that. But in many ways, the modern trade show or the modern exhibition that you just mentioned, that's a spin-off of the World Expos, because the World Expos through the 19th century used to have these conferences that would focus on everything from intellectual rights to the Braille system, to religious convocations where the world's religions came together. So these all, and even bankers used to have their conferences at the World Expos. The socialists used to meet there, which I think is kind of funny in many ways. At this uber capitalist, if you will, context, but hey, why not? Because everyone's coming there. But what really changed, I think, was that they saw this as a way to spin off. So the modern conference industry, a spin-off of the World Expos. Modern trade shows, the way we see them today, a spin-off of the World Expos. But I'll tell you something. Let me give you a hint of how big some of these are. This Consumer Electronics Show, which occurs every January in Las Vegas, and the world comes there. It's massive. Give or take about 150, 170,000 people attend. That's pretty big. They had this last year in 2025. They had 4,500 exhibitors. That's huge. The French Expo, the French World Expo in 1900 had 80,000 exhibitors. 125 years ago, they had almost 20 times what the most recent CES in Las Vegas had. That gives you a sense of their scope and just how enormous they were. But again, it's why the world came there. And they get 50,000, 150,000 rather, coming to Las Vegas. 50 million came to Paris. Or compare that to Shanghai in 2010. They brought in 73.5 million visitors. Massive. Expo 67 in Montreal, again, brought in about 50 million, and that was 2.5 times the population of all of Canada at that point. They have an enormous power to bring people together, and not just for a few moments, but perhaps for days, weeks, and you can expose them to these ideas over and over and over, because you might go back to a given exhibit over and over and over to experience it. Why not if you're there and you travel that far? That's better than a 60-second commercial or a 7 to 10 second commercial on the web. Yes, we have great reach with our technology today, but nothing replaces the face-to-face experience of an expo, not just because of its size, just because of the number of experiences that you have, but because, again, as I mentioned many times before, the serendipity of what you might run into. I mean, for instance, I was just thinking, 1855, at the expo then, there was actually a gold medal given to a guy named Andrian Tourneshan, I believe, for photography. Now think about this. The first photo that we know of was taken in 1826 to 27. We're not sure of the provenance. 1855, they're showing off photography, this brand spanking new technology at a World Expo. And what I kind of love is it was so French in one way. It was a photographic series of studies of a mind expressing a range of human. How French could you be? A mime, right? Marcel. But again, what if you were just wandering around and you bumped into this? You would be gobsmacked. You would be knocked off your feet by this. And then you've got the 1900 Expo with Art Nouveau. 1925 introduced Art Deco to the world. That's part of the allure of it, is what the French did to incite the world with new ideas, new modes of art, new technology, new architecture. And in fact, one of the things that I find most amazing if you walk around Paris is Paris, the look in your head was built for the 1855 Expo because Napoleon III had snagged the Expo for 1855, and to him, Paris was plagued by poverty, overcrowding. So he basically brought in Baron Haussmann, just a civil servant, to remake Paris's medieval streets. He saw them as a relic of the past. And what I love about this story is Haussmann, again, just a civil servant, but he was given the job because the notes from his job interview talk about how confident and even arrogant he was. So this is the kind of guy who will be able to push through a new style of architecture for the city. Because of course there was resistance. So he created the Haussmann style, those buildings all throughout Paris. They're roughly 12 to 20 meters tall. So for Americans, it's 39 to about 66 feet, with the steeply sloped roofs that are set at a 45-degree angle. They're made of that cream-colored limestone. And he built about 85 miles of new boulevards with these buildings for Paris. In fact, I think he expanded the number of arrondissements from 12 to 20. He took a wrecking ball to get this 20,000 buildings. There were 120,000 homes inside those buildings, all gone, including, by the way, including his own childhood home. He didn't care. He had no sentimentality. He built 34,000 new buildings that housed something like 215,000 apartments. The new boulevard would be up to about 24 meters wide, about 80 feet, all to satisfy Napoleon III's urge to air, unify, and beautify, quote unquote, Paris. That Paris that you walk through every day, that was built for the Expo. The Paris of Emily Goes to Paris, of Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, of Ratatouille even, was built for the 1855 Expo. And there's one estimate that Haussmann had engineered about 20% of all the streets in Paris, and he spent the equivalent of today about $90 billion redoing this. I find that it's fantastic that one man was given the green light to do all this, but he is the one who built the Paris we know today. And I find that, yeah, again, it was for Expo because the Expo served as a catalyst, as the reason to redo Paris. And that's true of all expos. The really good ones, it's the catalyst. It's the excuse we're giving ourselves to rebuild, to improve the infrastructure in a city. And it pays off. Imagine what Paris would be without these monuments. It would be a lovely city, yes. But imagine would it have the impact economically without the buildings created for expos? I would argue no.
Yeah, you wouldn't just having the Haussmannian buildings is one thing, but having the additional architecture, I think that creates Paris for. It sounds like I'm creating Paris for the tourists, but I think it is. When you conjure images of Paris, yes, you get the Haussmannian buildings, but you also get, not to dharma side, you get all the other buildings, all the landscapes, and
You do. Well, think about this. Now, the Louvre predates the expos, of course, but it was for the 1855 expo that it was opened up as a tourist attraction. Because before then, it was mostly where artists went to copy great works. It wasn't really perceived, conceived, thought of as a tourist attraction. So even that part of Paris, was built for the expos. Or, by the way, if you look at my background, this is one of my favorite paintings in the world. It's by Henri Rivière. It's his 36 studies or 36 scenes of the Eiffel Tower, which he did. He did them from all sorts of points of view, which I kind of love. And some where the tower is just a speck in the distance. Others, this is a winter scene during this construction. And it's so many works of art were done. Of course, Delaunay did it. Henri Rivière did it. They all did it. So much of the art, so much of the culture itself of Paris, right down to Haussmann designed many of the lampposts and bandstands in the 27 parks and squares because of the expo. That sense that you get of what Paris looks and feels like was all designed for the expo. No, you might be blanking out. So we could talk. Well, we're both of us sitting today, and I was just thinking, of course, that the name of my book is "Nobody Sits Like the French," and one of them, to me, the funnest stories is the quintessential French chair, the bistro chair, was created for the 1867 Expo in Paris, and it was by a German inventor, and yet it became so popular so quickly when he showed it off at the expo and his patent ran out on it, it became the world's first piece of mass-produced furniture.
Coffee Pot Conversations.
So that was an interview with Charles Pappas regarding his book, Nobody Sits Like the French. Another quick visual there for you. Boop, there we go. Yeah, I just need a quick sip. It's not coffee, it is water. No handle, you notice that? It's really weird. And what's also weird is I'm recording this and it's kind of reversed. So as I put my left hand up, the left hand goes up on there, which is weird. But anyway, enough of that. That was the interview with Charles Pappas. Amazing, amazing. Thank you very much for the book, for the insights and for your hospitality, if that's the right way of putting it, because I hosted you as the podcast. But anyway, so thank you for appearing on the show. Just before we pop over to the next section, I'm going to cheekily read the quote, which I did mention was in there. And this is from the book, It's a Bitter Little World. The smartest, toughest, nastiest quotes from film noir. Charles Pappas. Anyway, the quote is from 8mm from 1997, and it goes, "Sir, could I interest you in a battery-operated vagina?" Well, it's tempting, but no thanks. Okay, I hate to see you caught in one of those everyday situations that calls for a battery-operated vagina, and you just don't have one. You know what I mean? I'll risk it. And that's me reading poorly from a book, which wasn't Nobody Sits Like the French. Just getting that again. Look at that. It's beautiful, isn't it? Absolute beautiful. The tricolore. So, that being said, now it's time for Jasper's jingle.
Coming up on Coffee Pot Conversations.
We have, I really do need to repair my gate. Let's turn the camera this way a little bit. There we go. That's a nicer view, and yeah, just like relaxing and chillaxing. So what I need to do is just let you know, this is real. This isn't. But anyway, so coming up, we have season 6, which was recorded back in, well, the end of it was also November 2025, when I went and spent a few days building up a repertoire of recordings. The then sections of section 6 is from when I went back in, on my days, I don't remember, it was probably May 2026, it was around that time. I really should know. Nev was on holiday, but that's that. So, that's it. Now, just to sing us out, it's Rory with Press Maxon.
Coffee Pot Conversations.